And this is where everything starts to become clearer, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Attraction doesn't always begin in the words she hears. It begins in what she feels before she even understands why she's feeling it. And that changes how you use language completely. There are moments where a single sentence lands differently, not because it's impressive, but because it feels honest, unforced, almost too simple to be calculated. That's where these forbidden phrases actually live. Not in complexity, but in precision. Take step 1. Use her name, but not as a habit, as a signal. Not repeated, not stitched into every sentence like a technique, but placed carefully in moments that matter. Because when a woman hears her name in the middle of real attention, something subtle shifts. It pulls her out of autopilot. It makes the interaction feel personal in a way she can't ignore. And from there, you stop doing what most men do. You stop trying to impress through quantity. Step 2 is where that becomes obvious. You don't rely on surface-level admiration anymore. Not the predictable compliments she's heard 100 times. Instead, you start noticing what actually makes her unique. The way she thinks, the way she frames things, the way her mind works when she's not performing socially. And when you reflect that back to her calmly, something changes in her expression before she even responds. Because now it's not about being seen, it's about being understood. And that lands deeper than attention ever will. But here's where most men still slip. They confuse connection with performance. They think more effort creates more attraction, more words, more explanation, more emotional exposure too early. So step 3 brings everything back to something often overlooked. Gratitude. Not exaggerated, not strategic, just real acknowledgement of moments that would normally pass unnoticed. A small thank you that actually carries weight. A recognition that feels grounded, not performative. Because in a world where most interactions are taken for granted, sincerity stands out without trying, and yet even this can fall apart if something else is missing underneath it. The way you speak when you're unsure of yourself, which is why over-apologizing becomes so important to recognize. Saying sorry when nothing is wrong, filling silence with self-correction instead of presence. And slowly, that doesn't make you more likable. It makes you less solid in her eyes. A grounded man understands this difference. He doesn't avoid responsibility, but he also doesn't shrink his identity to maintain comfort. He speaks when needed, stands by what he says, and doesn't negotiate his presence in real time. And that starts to show up even before words are spoken. In posture, in stillness, in the way you occupy space without asking permission. Because body language speaks first. Always. When your posture is calm, when your shoulders are relaxed, when your eye contact is steady but not forced, something unspoken is communicated. Not dominance, not performance, but control. And then even movement starts to reflect it. No rushing, no unnecessary urgency, no scattered gestures trying to fill space. Just deliberate motion, as if nothing outside is pulling you out of yourself. And people notice that without knowing they're noticing it, because presence like that doesn't announce itself. It settles into the room. And then it extends into the smallest actions most men ignore completely. Remembering something she said in passing, bringing it up later without effort, checking in when it actually matters, not because it's calculated, but because you are actually paying attention. And those details, they don't create loud reactions, they create memory. And somewhere in that quiet space, before anything is labeled or defined, she already starts to feel something forming. And that's where things begin to move in a direction most men never see coming. And that's where the shift becomes undeniable. Because once she feels something, the real mistake most men make is trying to control it with words. But attraction doesn't work like that. It doesn't grow when you explain it. It grows when you leave it untouched long enough to breathe. Now compare that with another moment. Ryan is 51, based in Palo Alto. He's walking with Sophie, 28, after dinner. The street is quiet, the pace slow, nothing forced, nothing structured. There's a natural rhythm between them. Ryan doesn't try to define the moment. He doesn't explain what this is or where it's going or how he feels about it. He just stays in it. And something subtle happens. He matches her pace without thinking. When they stop, he doesn't rush to fill the silence. He lets it exist. And Sophie feels it before she can explain it. She lingers closer, not because she was told to, not because she was convinced, but because nothing is pushing her away from the moment. That's the part most men miss completely. Attraction doesn't need clarification, it needs space to stay alive. The moment you start explaining, justifying, or narrating what's happening, you pull her out of feeling and into analysis. And analysis is where emotion starts to dissolve, because thinking creates distance, feeling creates pull. That's why so many men walk away confused, saying things like, she seemed interested, then she wasn't, or it was going well until I said the wrong thing. In most cases, nothing broke. It was just spoken over too soon. Now look at another situation. Daniel is 53, in Santa Barbara. He's talking with Maya, 32, at a rooftop gathering. There's light tension between them, the kind that doesn't need direction. She teases him. He laughs. The energy builds naturally. But then he starts adjusting it, explaining himself, clarifying meaning, trying to make sure she understands him correctly. And slowly, something shifts. Not dramatically, just enough. Her expression softens, then flattens slightly. The tension that was carrying the interaction starts to dissolve, because she wasn't asking for clarity. She was experiencing feeling, and feeling doesn't survive interpretation. Here's the key insight most men never fully internalize. Attraction doesn't need to be explained to exist. It only needs space. Space to breathe. Space to unfold. Space to remain uncorrected. Men who understand this stop trying to secure moments with words. They stop trying to lock in outcomes that are already developing on their own. They trust what's happening without interfering with it. And that changes everything, because instead of managing the interaction, they become part of it. Now let's tighten this into something practical. Speak to her mind doesn't mean being clever or analytical. It means noticing what's happening beneath the surface and responding to that, not just the words. Because once a woman feels mentally understood, something in her relaxes, and when she relaxes, she becomes more open without even realizing it. Most men stay stuck at the surface. Small talk, predictable compliments, rehearsed interest. Then they wonder why nothing deepens. Others go too far the other way, over-explaining themselves, filling every silence with intention. Both miss the real point. Mental attraction isn't built through information. It's built through recognition. You're not trying to impress her mind. You're reflecting it back to her. If she's playful, you notice the intelligence behind it. If she's guarded, you sense the structure in that distance. If she opens up slightly, you don't rush to interpret it. You let it sit. And that's where she starts to feel something deeper. Not because you did more, but because you interfered less. Stoic thinking fits perfectly here. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the quality of your thoughts shapes the quality of your experience. In attraction, the same principle applies. The way you interpret her determines the emotional tone of the moment, not loudly, not visibly, but internally. And she feels that internal state more than she hears anything you say. That's why two men can say the exact same sentence and create completely different outcomes. One creates curiosity, the other creates distance. It was never about the words, it was about what stood behind them. And when you finally understand that attraction begins before language fully forms, you stop trying to force moments into clarity. You let them stay alive a little longer, right before everything shifts again into something most men never notice happening until it's already too late. Pressure doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with obvious mistakes or dramatic moments. Most of the time, it hides inside good intentions. And that's exactly why it changes everything. A woman feels it instantly, even when you think you're being smooth, calm, or composed. Pressure is created the moment you attach meaning to the outcome. When you start needing the conversation to go somewhere, needing her to respond a certain way, needing reassurance that you're doing things right. And once that need exists, something subtle shifts. Attraction stops expanding and starts tightening. Most men never see it happen in real time. One moment everything feels open, relaxed, almost effortless. And then, without anything obvious changing, the energy collapses. Not because of what was said, but because of what was silently wanted underneath it. Stoic thinking points directly at this blind spot. Marcus Aurelius said, "If something disturbs you, it is not the thing itself, but your judgment of it." In attraction, that judgment is the idea that this moment must lead somewhere specific. Remove that, and the pressure dissolves on its own. And when pressure dissolves, space appears. Space is what keeps attraction alive, because women don't pull away from closeness itself. They pull away when closeness starts to feel heavy, when it turns into expectation, when it becomes something they have to manage instead of simply experience. Most men assume pressure comes from what they say. Too many questions, too many moves, too much effort. But that's not the real source. It's always the intent behind it. Are you speaking to explore, or are you speaking to secure something? That difference is everything. When you move without outcome in mind, your presence becomes lighter, your timing slows down, your attention stops chasing reactions, and strangely, that's when things begin to deepen, because nothing is being forced into place. Epictetus said, "No one is free who is not master of himself." In real interaction, that mastery looks like restraint, not holding back out of fear, but not reaching forward out of need, just staying centered enough to let the moment unfold without interference. And when a man reaches that state, something interesting happens. He stops trying to maintain attraction and starts allowing it. Silence becomes part of the conversation instead of something to fix. His words become fewer, not because he has nothing to say, but because he no longer feels the need to fill space that doesn't belong to him. And that changes how he's experienced, because attraction isn't sustained by constant engagement, it's sustained by emotional freedom inside the interaction. The sense that nothing is being trapped, nothing is being forced, nothing is being held in place. Seneca captured this indirectly when he spoke about unnecessary suffering. Most pressure is just anticipation, a future outcome you're already reacting to. When you stay present, that entire layer disappears, and what's left feels lighter, cleaner, more real. But here's where most men unknowingly reset everything they've built. They start believing they need to define the moment. They start explaining what's happening, trying to clarify the connection, trying to make sure she sees what they see. And in that instant, they move from presence into interpretation, and interpretation kills feeling, because she was already experiencing something before it was explained. She was already reacting before it was named. And the moment you translate it into words too early, you interrupt the natural progression. It's like watching something breathe and trying to describe the rhythm while it's still moving. The feeling doesn't disappear, it just loses space, and without space, it collapses into thought. This is why some moments feel perfect right up until they're talked through. Nothing goes wrong on the surface, but something underneath stops expanding, not because attraction wasn't there, but because it was no longer left alone. And when a man learns to recognize that point without reacting to it, his entire presence changes. He stops trying to secure the moment, he starts trusting it. And that trust is where something deeper begins to form. Not through control, but through stillness that doesn't rush to explain itself. Because in attraction, what you leave untouched often matters more than what you say out loud. And once you begin to notice that, you start realizing something most men never see clearly. The real shift doesn't come from doing more. It comes from no longer interfering with what's already happening underneath. That's where the shift becomes almost invisible, but irreversible. Calm men don't feel like they're pushing anything forward. They're not chasing a reaction, not trying to escalate a moment, not trying to secure anything in real time. They're simply there, present, steady, unhurried. And that changes everything underneath the surface. Because calm presence isn't detachment. It's not emotional absence. It's engagement without hunger, interest without urgency, attention without need. And women feel that difference immediately, even if they can't explain it. Seneca once wrote that true peace is being fully present without being pulled forward by anxiety about what comes next. In attraction, that's exactly what creates stability. A man who isn't mentally racing ahead doesn't create emotional friction, he creates space. And in that space, something subtle begins to happen. She doesn't feel managed, she doesn't feel positioned, she doesn't feel like she's being steered toward an outcome. She just feels allowed. Allowed to stay, allowed to lean in, allowed to pull back without pressure. And ironically, that freedom is what keeps her closer. Most men misunderstand this completely. They think interest must be maintained through action, through messaging, through constant momentum. But momentum driven by anxiety always leaks tension, and tension collapses attraction over time. What actually deepens desire is restraint, not withholding, not games, just a quiet refusal to force what should unfold naturally. Epictetus said, "No one is free who is not master of himself." In real interaction, that mastery shows up as emotional independence. You don't adjust your state based on her response. You don't speed up when she slows down. You don't overcorrect when silence appears. You stay consistent, and consistency builds something far more powerful than intensity ever could. Because intensity spikes interest, consistency builds trust, and trust is what allows attraction to settle instead of flicker. When men finally stop chasing, something counterintuitive happens. They stop interrupting what was already forming. They stop explaining what didn't need explanation. They stop filling the space that was doing the real work. And suddenly, she has room to feel again, to reflect, to miss the presence, to revisit the emotional trace of the interaction without it being overwritten by pressure. That's where desire starts echoing instead of reacting, and most men never realize they were the ones cutting that echo short. A simple shift changes everything. You stop asking, "How do I keep this going?" and start noticing, "What happens when I don't interfere?" Because attraction doesn't grow from constant input, it grows from emotional breathing room. Seneca hinted at this when he warned against suffering twice, once in anticipation, once in reality. Pressure is exactly that. Living the outcome before it arrives. When you remove that habit, the interaction becomes lighter, cleaner, more natural. And in that natural state, something interesting emerges. She begins to choose instead of respond. Not because you forced space, but because you stopped crowding it. And choice is where attraction stabilizes. At this point, nothing feels rushed, nothing feels negotiated. The connection either deepens on its own terms or it doesn't, and you're no longer emotionally negotiating with it. That's the real transformation most men don't expect. Not becoming more persuasive, not becoming more intense, but becoming unbothered enough to let reality reveal itself without interference. And when that happens, your present stops feeling like something she has to figure out, and starts feeling like something she can simply return to. Quiet, familiar, grounded. The kind of presence that doesn't disappear under uncertainty and doesn't overreact under interest. Just steady enough that nothing feels like it has to be forced. And in that steadiness, the dynamic stops being about pursuit altogether. It becomes something simpler, something she doesn't rush to define, but also doesn't want to step away from.